June 22, 1941. Kiev University, Soviet Ukraine. The morning air smells like chalk dust and old books. And 25-year-old Lyudmila Pavlichenko is sitting in a fourth-year history lecture when the professor stops mid-sentence, puts down his chalk and says, "Germany has invaded." For a moment, nobody moves. The classroom is silent except for the sound of traffic outside and the distant wail of an air raid siren starting up somewhere to the west. And then Lyudmila stands up, gathers her textbooks, walks out of the classroom, and heads straight to the nearest Red Army recruiting station. Because Lyudmila Pavlichenko has spent the last 9 years preparing for a war that most people hoped would never come. She's trained with rifles since she was 16. She's competed in sharpshooting competitions across Ukraine. She can hit a target the size of a playing card at 300 meters with iron sights. And when she walks into that recruiting station and tells the officer she wants to be a sniper, he looks her up and down, smiles like she's just told him a joke, and says, "We don't need snipers. We need nurses. Can you work a bandage?" Lyudmila doesn't smile back. She says, "I can work a rifle better than most of your men." The officer laughs. And that laugh, that moment of dismissal, is going to haunt the German army for the next 18 months. Because in the time it takes for the war to reach Kiev, for the Red Army to fall back to Odessa, and for the siege of Sevastopol to turn into a bloodbath that kills 100,000 people, Lyudmila Pavlichenko is going to become something the Germans will call Lady Death. And by the time she's evacuated from the front lines with a piece of shrapnel lodged in her neck, she'll have killed more enemy soldiers than any woman in the history of modern warfare. But this is getting ahead of our story, because to understand what happens in Odessa and Sevastopol, you first need to understand the problem that Lyudmila Pavlichenko represents and why, in June 1941, the Soviet Union is the only country in the world desperate enough to put women on the front lines. The German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 is the largest military operation in human history. 3 million German soldiers crossed the border on June 22nd. They're supported by 3,000 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, and 2,000 aircraft. They advance at a rate of 50 miles per day. And within 3 weeks, they've encircled and destroyed entire Soviet armies, captured 500,000 prisoners, and are driving toward Moscow with nothing but disorganized resistance standing in their way. The Soviet Union is losing. It's losing so badly that Stalin orders a general mobilization of every able-bodied person in the country, which includes women, which is something that no other major power has done. Not because the Soviets are progressive, but because they're desperate. By August 1941, the Red Army had lost 2 million men killed, wounded, or captured. That's 2 million trained soldiers gone in 2 months. And replacements are being rushed to the front with maybe 6 weeks of training, if they're lucky. Which means they're being sent into combat barely knowing how to load a rifle. The Germans are counting on this. They're counting on the Soviets running out of men before the Germans run out of ammunition. But what the Germans don't account for is that the Soviets don't just have men. They have women. And they have women like Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who walk into recruiting stations and demand to fight. And when the officers laugh at them, they prove their point by outperforming every male recruit at the rifle range. When Lyudmila Pavlichenko finally convinces the Red Army to accept her, she's assigned to the 25th Rifle Division, which is deploying to Odessa, a port city on the Black Sea that's about to become one of the most heavily contested battlefields on the Eastern Front. The commanding officer takes one look at Pavlichenko and says, "You're a woman. Women don't fight." Pavlichenko says, "Give me a rifle and I'll show you what women can do." The officer, probably because he's out of better options, hands her a Mosin Nagant rifle, a bolt-action weapon that weighs 9 pounds and kicks like a mule. And he points to a trench 200 meters away, where the Germans are dug in. He says, "There are 2 Romanian officers in that trench. If you can hit one of them, I'll let you stay." Pavlichenko looks through the scope. The distance is 200 meters, well within range, but the targets are partially concealed behind sandbags, moving unpredictably, and the wind is gusting from the east. She chambers around. She breathes out. She pulls the trigger. The first officer drops. She chambers another round. The second officer drops. The commanding officer stares at her for a long moment, and then he says, "You're assigned to the sniper platoon." That's how Lyudmila Pavlichenko's war begins, with 2 kills in her first hour on the front lines. Over the next 2.5 months, fighting in the ruins of Odessa, she's going to add 185 more. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko was born on July 12, 1916, in Bila Tserkva, Ukraine, to a family that was neither wealthy nor poor, just working-class Soviets trying to survive in a country that was tearing itself apart. Her father worked in a factory. Her mother was a teacher. And Lyudmila grew up in the kind of environment where you either learned to be tough or you got crushed, so she learned to be tough. She was the kid who climbed higher than the boys. She was the teenager who refused to let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. And when she was 16 years old, a boy in her neighborhood joined a shooting club and started bragging about his marksmanship. Lyudmila, annoyed by the bragging, joined the same club just to prove she could outshoot him. She did. And in the process, she discovered something that most 16-year-olds don't discover, which is that she had an almost supernatural talent for reading wind, judging distance, and putting bullets exactly where she wanted them to go. By the time she was 18, Lyudmila was competing in regional sharpshooting competitions. By 20, she'd earned a marksman badge. And by 25, when the war started, she'd fired more rounds through a rifle than most Red Army soldiers would fire in their entire careers. But here's the thing about Lyudmila Pavlichenko that sets her apart from every other sniper story. She wasn't some farm girl who learned to hunt rabbits. She was a university student. She was studying history. She wanted to be a researcher, maybe a professor. And she had a young son at home that she was raising as a single mother after her husband died. She wasn't a soldier. She was an intellectual who could shoot. And when the war came, she didn't join because she wanted to kill Germans. She joined because she believed, bone deep, that if fascism won in Europe, there wouldn't be any universities left, there wouldn't be any history departments, and there wouldn't be any future worth living in. So she volunteered. And when the Red Army tried to shunt her into a nursing role, she fought back. Not because she hated nursing, but because she knew that one sniper could save more lives than 100 nurses by removing the soldiers who were doing the killing. It was cold logic. It was the historian's logic. And it was the logic that would carry her through 18 months of combat that would have broken most men. The siege of Odessa lasted 73 days, from August to October 1941. And it's brutal in ways that most battles aren't. The city is surrounded. Supplies come in by ship, and half those ships get sunk by German bombers. The civilian population is starving. The military is running out of ammunition. And the Germans, along with their Romanian allies, are throwing everything they have at the defensive lines, trying to break through before winter sets in. In this chaos, Lyudmila Pavlichenko finds her purpose. She works alone, or with a spotter, moving through the rubble of destroyed buildings, setting up firing positions in attics, in basements, behind collapsed walls, anywhere she can get a line of sight on enemy positions. She waits for hours, sometimes days, and when a German or Romanian officer makes the mistake of exposing himself for just a few seconds, Pavlichenko takes the shot. The Mosin Nagant has a muzzle velocity of 2,700 feet per second. At 300 meters, the bullet takes less than half a second to reach the target. Most officers don't even hear the shot. They just drop. And by the time their men figure out where the shot came from, Pavlichenko is gone, relocated to a new position, waiting for the next target. By the end of September, Pavlichenko had 187 confirmed kills, which is more than any other sniper. In her division, male or female. The Germans know about her. They've started putting up wanted posters with her name on them. They've sent counter-snipers to hunt her. And one of those counter-snipers, a man whose name was never recorded, but who reportedly had over 100 kills of his own, spends 3 days trying to find Pavlichenko in the ruins of Odessa. It turns into a duel. The German sniper sets up in a bombed-out factory. Pavlichenko sets up across the street in a collapsed apartment building. For 3 days, they watch each other's positions, waiting for the other to make a mistake. On the 3rd day, the German moves. Just a fraction, just enough to adjust his scope. Pavlichenko sees the movement. She fires. The German drops. When Soviet soldiers go to recover the body, they find a rifle with notches carved into the stock. 103 notches. Pavlichenko adds one more to her own tally and moves on, because there's no time to celebrate, no time to process what it means to kill a man who is trying to kill you. There's just the next target, and the target after that, and the grinding realization that this war isn't going to end anytime soon. When Odessa falls in October 1941, Pavlichenko is evacuated by ship to Sevastopol, the last Soviet stronghold in Crimea. And if Odessa was brutal, Sevastopol is apocalyptic. The siege lasts 250 days. The city is bombed daily. Food runs out. Water runs out. And the Soviet defenders, including Pavlichenko, are holding a perimeter that shrinks every week as the Germans push closer. By December, Pavlichenko's unit was down to 60% strength. By February, it's down to 40%. And through it all, Pavlichenko keeps shooting. She's up to 257 kills now, which makes her the most successful sniper in the Soviet army. And the Germans are so obsessed with killing her that they've reportedly offered a reward to any soldier who can take her out. They've sent counter-sniper teams. They've tried artillery strikes on suspected sniper positions. They've even tried propaganda broadcasts, taunting her over loudspeakers, saying, "Lyudmila Pavlichenko, come out and we'll give you a nice German uniform and chocolates." Pavlichenko's response is to shoot the officer manning the loudspeaker. But the counter-sniper duels are getting worse. By April 1942, Pavlichenko had killed 36 enemy snipers, each one a battle of patience, nerves, and luck. One duel lasts 4 days. The enemy sniper is good, maybe the best Pavlichenko has ever faced, and for 4 days they trade positions, probe each other's defenses, wait for the mistake. On the 5th day, the German makes his mistake. He shifts position at dawn when the light is behind him, and for just a moment, his scope catches the sun and flashes. Pavlichenko fires. The German is kill number 36. And then, in June 1942, Pavlichenko's luck finally ran out. She's in a forward observation post when a German mortar barrage lands directly on her position. Shrapnel rips through the bunker. Pavlichenko is hit in the face and neck. She's bleeding. She's half conscious. And when the medics pull her out of the rubble, they find a piece of shrapnel embedded 2 inches from her carotid artery. She's evacuated to a field hospital, then to Moscow, and her combat career is over. She's 25 years old. She's been on the front lines for 18 months. And she's killed 309 enemy soldiers, a number that will never be matched by any other female sniper in history. The Soviet Union doesn't waste Pavlichenko's skills. They turn her into a propaganda weapon. In August 1942, she's sent on a tour of the United States and Canada to drum up support for the war effort. And when she steps off the plane in Washington, D.C., she's 26 years old, wearing a Soviet uniform with medals pinned to her chest. And she's about to discover that the mockery doesn't stop just because you've killed more enemy soldiers than anyone thought possible. American reporters ask her if she wears makeup at the front. They ask her if her uniform makes her look fat. One reporter asks if Soviet women are allowed to wear nice dresses. Pavlichenko, who has spent 18 months being shot at by the best snipers Germany has to offer, stares at the reporter and says, "I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The room goes silent. And that quote, that moment, becomes one of the most famous moments of World War II, because it captures everything about what Pavlichenko represents. A woman who refused to accept the role society tried to force on her, who proved herself in the most brutal way possible, and who was still treated like she was less than the men she'd outperformed. Pavlichenko's tour of the United States is a revelation. She meets Eleanor Roosevelt, who becomes a lifelong friend. She speaks at rallies. She appears on the cover of magazines. And everywhere she goes, she tells the same story. That women can fight, that women can kill, and that the only thing holding women back is the men who refuse to let them try. When she returned to the Soviet Union in late 1942, she's given the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the country's highest military honor. She's promoted to major, and she's assigned to train other snipers, a job she does for the rest of the war, personally training hundreds of Soviet marksmen and women, many of whom go on to rack up impressive kill counts of their own. By the end of World War II, the Soviet Union had deployed 2,000 female snipers. 500 of them survive. And of those 500, not one will ever surpass Lyudmila Pavlichenko's record of 309 confirmed kills. After the war, Lyudmila Pavlichenko returned to Kiev University and finished her history degree. She completed her doctorate. She worked as a historian and researcher for the Soviet Navy. She never remarried after her first husband died, though she maintained a close friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt until Roosevelt's death in 1962. And she rarely spoke about the war. When journalists asked her what it felt like to kill 309 people, she'd say, "They weren't people. They were fascists. And every one I killed meant one less soldier shooting at my comrades." Pavlichenko died on October 10, 1974, at the age of 58. From complications related to a stroke that was likely caused by years of untreated PTSD. She's buried in Novodevichy Cemetery in Moscow, one of the most prestigious cemeteries in Russia, reserved for national heroes. Her grave is marked with a simple stone that reads, Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko, Hero of the Soviet Union, 1916 to 1974. But her legacy is bigger than a gravestone. Her legacy is every woman who's been told she can't do something and who proved the doubters wrong not with words, but with results. Because in the end, that's what Lyudmila Pavlichenko did. She didn't argue. She didn't complain. She just picked up a rifle, went to the front lines, and killed more enemy soldiers than most entire battalions. And when people mocked her, when they said women couldn't fight, she let her record speak for itself. 309 confirmed kills. 18 months of combat, 36 enemy snipers defeated in one-on-one duels, and 0 apologies for being better at her job than anyone thought a woman could be. Because courage isn't about what's between your legs. It's about what's between your ears. And Lyudmila Pavlichenko had more courage, more skill, and more determination than most people will ever know. That's why they called her Lady Death. And that's why, 80 years later, we're still telling her story.